everybody. It's Mark Bassett. I'm the CEO of Hemlock Semiconductor. And for those of you who don't know, we make something called polysilicon. Polysilicon is the purest man-made substance in the world, and it's the foundational building block for both the semiconductor and solar value chains. So we like to say we connect and energize the world. And I'm going to be hosting a series of interviews called Supply Chain Matters. That's kind of an interesting, catchy title, but what does that really mean? Well, I'm the furthest thing from an expert in sustainability, but I'm going to be trying to learn from a series of experts who've spent most, if not their entire careers in sustainability and really focused on decarbonizing supply chains and the value proposition of doing that. So I hope you're excited. I'm excited to learn from these people, and they're going to hopefully help Hemlock on our journey toward proving something we believe, that not all solar is created equal. And I'm really excited today for our first guest to be Terry Yossi, who's had a 35-plus year career in sustainability. His last role was president and CEO of World Environmental Center. He was also with the EPA. So Terry's really looked at this subject from a variety of different viewpoints. So welcome, Terry. Thank you for joining us today.
Good afternoon.
I think my first question is kind of back to your career. You've had a long, really interesting career. And so you've seen sustainability grow and look at it from different perspectives. Maybe you can spend a few minutes talking about kind of the journey that sustainability has taken over those 3+ decades, and maybe more importantly, where you see it going forward.
Thank you, and very much enjoy being part of this conversation. I think the concept of sustainability has been continuously migrating. And it started out as part of, in particular, the private sector's effort to burnish its reputation by such things as directed philanthropy or improved community relations or better compliance with environment, health, and safety regulations. Those are all important things to not only do in the past, but to continue doing. But I think the most important development that I've seen in sustainability, particularly over the last 10 to 15 years, has been its migration from the periphery to the core of the business enterprise. And what I mean by that is that sustainability is now part of the reason and the content behind business strategy and business operations. And I think that one of the reasons we see so many companies around the world enter into conversations and collaborations and engage their own employees in sustainability is because they're seeing a much more tangible and direct business value from sustainability. If there would be one challenge that I would offer to any CEO of any company of any size these days, it would be to try to move your enterprise so that it's what I would say fit for purpose. That is to say, not only manage your enterprise so that you're achieving the traditional business performance metrics around profitability, earnings per share, et cetera, but see where the opportunities are for your business success to be leveraged into helping to solve societal problems. This is the essence of what sustainability has become. And as a result, sustainability, more than ever, is about business transformation.
Thanks, Terry. You said a number of interesting things there. One of the things I've read, number one, kind of as you mentioned, you've seen a proliferation of companies take more and more bold stands around not just sustainability, but all the sorts of ESG issues. Maybe you can spend a few more minutes talking about the value drivers they really see there. They get value out of it. Maybe expound a little bit more on what specific values they're getting from that. And then number two, I've seen a few articles in the last year or two where people note that, but they're questioning whether is this just a fad or will it stay? In other words, when times get tough, will companies begin to abandon some of these things because ultimately the bottom line is what matters?
Well, I think we have, in response to your last observation, I think we have a pretty good short-term reaction about its staying power at a time when the marketplace had precipitously declined in the months of March and April in particular. We saw that those firms that were most focused around sustainability and whose investors are part of this environment, society, governance group of investors, those firms outperformed any other segment of the marketplace across a variety of market exchanges. So I think the short-term answer in the midst of a crisis is that sustainability is holding its own. Not that it's the only factor, but it's increasingly important as a factor. In terms of just where the value comes from in terms of a sustainability commitment, I think there are several levels of value. One is just simple efficiency. To the extent that a company is using energy more efficiently, water more efficiently, materials more efficiently, that's a better run company. And with those efficiencies come cost savings. I remember when I was doing work in China with General Motors, we had a joint project with GM's joint venture company, Shanghai General Motors. And we were training hundreds of suppliers and using metrics like carbon emissions, other air quality emissions, water savings, materials, et cetera, recycling, but we are also looking at cost savings. Mm-hmm. These Chinese companies were making tremendous progress using sustainability metrics grafted to their own management system as a way to drive their business enterprise and using those cost savings to reinvest in their business. I think at another level, there are higher performance standards that emerge from sustainability practices. A company like Nestle, $108 billion company, the largest food company in the world, works with a couple of 100,000 farmers globally. And over the course of time, they've been able to work with these farmers to water their crops more efficiently, use less fertilizer, and basically get more production out of the available acreage. And in the process, Nestle has been able to not only improve the living standards of those farmers, but raise the performance standards of their business and their supply chain simultaneously. So I think those are some very tangible, practical business examples of where the value of sustainability is coming from.
Good, thanks. I mean, I think at Hemlock, our traditional view has really been focused on what you talked about initially. It's how do we consume less raw material? We consume a lot of electricity. How do we consume less electricity? How do we recycle streams? So that, again, it's focused on, in a certain sense, both reducing emissions but lowering our cost. In the recent past, we've started to focus on some things like simple things like how do we get ourselves around the site, and what kind of cars do we have, or do we have bikes, and to something as simple as trying to get rid of styrofoam in our cafeteria. If we want to look for, are there companies out there that you think do that kind of thing especially well that you might see us using as an example to try to learn from them?
I think you're going to be able to find great examples in almost any business sector you look at around the world. But let me give you a couple of examples. And also to illustrate a more basic point, just as the market never stops being dynamic, neither does the sustainability marketplace slow down. If anything, the pace of commitments and competitiveness is accelerating. So I'll give you just a couple of quick examples. So we all know that Walmart is the largest retailer in the world, $338 billion of market cap. Several years ago, it made a commitment to reduce by 1 gigaton the amount of carbon emissions by 2030. Now, even as large as Walmart is, it can't possibly do that by itself. But fortunately, it has hundreds of thousands of suppliers that it can, quote unquote, invite to participate in that process. And many of them are. Walmart's keeping track through a scorecard. And so that's a business-driven process that's aimed at global scale. At the other end of the spectrum, take a company like Trane Technologies, which was spun off from Ingersoll Rand in February. It's a $24 billion market cap. It has the same 1 gigaton objective as Walmart by 2030. Only its strategy will be completely different because Trane Technologies will make the chillers and the other HVAC units that will enable millions of people, tens of millions of people around the world, particularly in emerging markets, to enjoy air conditioning in a much more sustainable way. So you're going to see different strategies implied and employed by different companies. One other point I'd make directly on the supply chain. I think we are getting past the day in a variety of business sectors when supply chain relationships were governed solely or primarily by price. Now customers are under a lot of pressure to demonstrate that they know where their emissions are coming from and are making commitments to do them, to reduce them. I think that's a great opportunity for a company like Hemlock Semiconductor, because you're at the sweet spot where your business products and services actually provide the business solution to many of the problems that your customers are facing. So I think there's a competitiveness value to that. I think there's a customer relations value to that. There's a branding value to that. So I think wherever you look, you're going to see examples of best practices, but also the emergence of new kinds of business strategies.
That leads me really to, I had a couple other questions out of what you just said. I think, when you take business, and usually, the traditional business, you're sitting across from a table from somebody, and it's, people view it in a bit of a zero-sum game. So the more he gets, the less I get.
Right.
Whether that's a customer, whether that's a supplier, it could be frankly, a co-producer if you're negotiating some sort of swap. And you're kind of all fighting over who's going to get a bigger piece of the pie. And I think the bigger, more interesting question, and you kind of alluded to it, I think, in the answer to your last question is how can you collaborate differently to make the pie, not fighting over a single pie of a specific size, but make the pie bigger for everybody. And I think, maybe you can speak from it. And so how can you collaborate differently? And I think you bring a unique perspective because you have been in, industry associations, you have been in government roles, and you have been in NGO roles. Maybe you can talk a little bit about how the three of those kind of types of organizations might come together and collaborate a little differently to grow the pie rather than fight over the same piece of the pie.
Sure. Let's illustrate different kinds of collaboration. There could be customer-supplier collaboration. So, for example, companies like 3M, Dow, and BASF, they're literally sitting down with their principal customers downstream from them and dedicating teams of people on both the customer and supplier side to develop solutions around climate change, water efficiency, materials innovation, many other things. So there's customer to supplier collaboration. I think on a larger scale, sometimes through associations, but also sometimes involving partnerships between non-governmental organizations and groups of companies. We're seeing efforts to establish sustainable beef standards or sustainable sugar standards or sustainable wood growing standards in ways that have to be observant of antitrust rules. So this is pre-competitive collaboration, but at the same time are setting performance standards for those companies that in those meetings probably end up representing about 80% of the marketplace production. So you can get to scale and still stay within antitrust collaboration. I think in the case of your business sector, Mark, you're in a sector that is growing. So this question of zero sum, who gets the piece of the pie, you will have the opportunity to grow your business, as will your competitors, because I just saw recently where renewable energy has displaced coal in terms of the amount of electricity generated in the US. And I don't think that's just a one-off, one-time event. I think it's a permanent event that will continue. And I think that, so the question then becomes, how do you position your company for success in a growing, more robust marketplace? And I think the field is present with many opportunities, and particularly across your value chain and supply chain. But also, I think every major business sector in the world is going to be looking at backing out of fossil fuels. First coal, then oil. I saw just this past week where the CEO of BP has declared about $17 billion worth of assets have to be written off just because of the pandemic.
Right.
And I think that's making BP and other oil companies far less attractive to investors, whether they're ESG investors or other investors. So I think you're in a very dynamic, promising, expanding marketplace, and your company occupies a sweet spot in terms of its positioning.
Kind of getting to that, in our personal journey, we've kind of stumbled on, maybe is the right word, I don't know, but the fact that not all solar is created equal. As a matter of fact, you can drive dramatic changes in embodied carbon depending on the type of solar panel that you put in. And so, for example, you can put in an ultra low carbon solar panel versus a typical solar panel, and the amount of embodied carbon in that ultra low carbon panel is about 70% lower than a standard panel, which, if a company like Google puts in a 100 megawatt solar panel farm, that's equivalent of taking about 100,000 cars off the road. Give me your thoughts on your perspective on that as a value proposition, and then how a company like ourselves, relatively small company, way far away upstream, away from the final kind of decision makers in most of these, what kind of value proposition in your mind is that, and how do we get more traction and awareness of that?
First, I'd say that this whole process that we're calling decarbonization has already built up significant momentum. I think it's going to accelerate for the simple reason that a de facto global standard is coming into focus, and that's called Net Zero 2050, in which it is now expected that any global company of any size will have committed to netting out carbon emissions to zero by 2050. And so you're seeing very prominent companies make this commitment, even in the oil sector. BP, Shell, and Total have made net zero 2050 commitments. Now, there's a lot of speculation about how they're ever going to get there, given the business that they're in. But putting that aside, I think the fact that Hemlock Semiconductor is offering a prime decarbonization product and series of products for your business customers, I think you have the ability to not only in narrow business terms make an argument attractive to your customers. This is where I think creative use of social media, creative collaborations with NGOs and others can raise the visibility of your company such that you become differentiated from your competitors who may be slower, less adept, less mindful of the collaboration opportunities. It's not all about money. It's all about strategic relationships. And I don't think I'd be depending in the short run on the U.S. government to do much for you, because if anything, the U.S. government's in a very isolated position, whereas China's a strong player, the EU is upping its game. So there may be other collaborations with governments around the world, but I think that there's a whole set of options that are available to you to leverage off your basic business portfolio.
Well, thanks a lot, Terry. We're coming to the end of our time here. I really appreciate the discussion and really enjoyed it. I got any last quick question, any kind of final words of advice or words of wisdom for us as we continue on our journey here at Hemlock?
I have three quick closing thoughts. One is back to the idea of, as you grow your business, as you position your business in the global marketplace, think about the purpose that you're serving. You're not only pleasing customers, you're helping to solve planetary scale problems. So the purpose-driven company concept, I think, is a very powerful branding concept for you, and it plays very well into your core business strengths. Secondly, I think the world now and in the future is about talent, talent, talent. And I think millennials want to work for companies that are seen as purpose-driven. They will be interviewing their employers as much as their prospective employers will be interviewing them. Companies that, like yours, that are offering a strong sustainability business performance, I think will be attractive to millennials and give you a competitive advantage. And then lastly, just think of all of the business platforms that sustainability can provide for you. Suppliers and customers working across those common chains to leverage your business skills with their needs and providing solutions to them. So I think we're living in a very, very exciting time. the risks are large, so are the opportunities for those who know how to position themselves and take advantage of them to benefit their own businesses and society at the same time.
Thanks a lot, Terry. Again, I really appreciate
Thank
our
you.
discussion and hope we can stay in touch.
We will. Thank you.
Thank you.